We would like to remind you that food and drink are not permitted in the theater. Also, please note that photography and audio and video recording is prohibited. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Michelle Gray, the Creative and Programming Director of the New York Times live conversation series TimesTalks. For over 20 years, TimesTalks has paired New York Times journalists with the brightest and boldest creative minds from the fields of film, art, literature, theater, and of course, music. I'm delighted to welcome you to tonight's event with Grammy and Emmy award-winning and Tony-nominated singer, actor, and composer Harry Connick Jr. This evening's conversation and performance is in celebration of his recently released album, True Love, a celebration of Cole Porter, and his Broadway show, Harry Connick Jr., a celebration of Cole Porter. This December, Connick's show will bring both the magic of Cole Porter's compositions and one of the world's most celebrated live performers to the Broadway stage, with a vibrant 25-piece orchestra and a modern multimedia presentation. Moderating tonight's talk is Michael Cooper, a culture reporter for the New York Times. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Michael Cooper and Harry Connick Jr.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everybody, for coming, and thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, Michael.
It's lovely to have you here.
Thank you.
You're not only, a triple threat singer, songwriter, actor, but you're going to be a neighbor of ours down the block with your Broadway show about Cole Porter.
Yes.
So tell me how you got into this Cole Porter thing. What drew you to him? I think he's the tops, but how did you go down this rabbit hole?
You got a much bigger laugh for that, but nobody laughed at the lovely to have me here. I thought that was, yeah. Well, let me start by saying thanks to y'all for coming, and thank you to the New York Times. I really appreciate it, and thank you for being here. So, Cole Porter, like many of the other American songwriters, Gershwin and Jerome Kern and Irving Berlin and the rest of them, was one of these composers whose music I had played without knowing it was his, because they lend themselves so well to jazz improvisation. You would show up on a gig and somebody would play one of their songs, and you'd learn it and play it, and you'd kind of absorb it into your repertoire. And then when I got a little bit older, like maybe 14, 15, I started studying with Ellis Marsalis, who was the first person to point out the importance of lyrics when you're playing an instrumental piece, and composers. And so then I started saying, oh, that guy wrote that song, that guy wrote that song. And then it was so cool. You know Chez Josephine's restaurant? So I used to be the piano player there when I was 18. And Jean-Claude Baker, he would always tell me that I was playing too loud. But this is before cell phones, and I used to go upstairs on my break and call my dad on the payphone. I call him collect, and I say, I need some tunes. And he'd say, why don't you play Harold Arlen tunes? Or why don't you play, Irving Berlin tunes? Or why don't you play Cole Porter tunes? I'm like, Dad, give me some Cole tunes. He'd be like, oh, you could play Love for Sale, or you could play, Night and Day, or whatever it was. So then I really started using these tunes functionally as part of my work. Mm-hmm. So cut to about a year and a half ago, I just signed with Verve Records after having been with Columbia for 30 years. And Danny Bennett, who is Tony Bennett's son, was the president at the time of Verve Records. And he said, Harry, we want you to be on the label. And my contract was up, and I said, this sounds like a great possibility. And he said, what kind of music do you want to do? I said, man, I seriously make 10 albums for you right now. I could do a gospel record, I could do a New Orleans funk record, I could do an album of all love ballads, all happy songs. I mean, I just love being in the studio, and I'm passionate about whatever that is. And I said, I also love Cole Porter. And he said, whoa, that's the one. I said, really? You want me to do a Cole Porter songbook album? He said, we would love that. And that is when the process of making the record started.
It's funny because unlike so many other people who created the American songbook, I mean, Cole Porter did it all. Like, George had Ira Gershwin to do the lyrics. Rogers had Hart. Is there a difference playing and living with the music of somebody who is such a great composer and could write such beautiful tunes, but also such a witty, urbane lyricist?
I think if you could musicalize Cole Porter's lyrics, they would be the melodies and chords that he wrote, and vice versa. There's such a synergy among the harmonies, the melodies, and the lyrics that he wrote, and it's so fascinating when you really start deconstructing these songs, when you really start breaking them down, way beyond what I would ever do as a singer or as a jazz musician. When you start to and I don't mean from a historical point of view. I'm sure there's people in this room who could probably tell you more about, oh, that was from this show in 1932 or whatever. But just musically deconstructing these songs, it's just in a class by itself. It happens to be my favorite. He happens to be my favorite, but it's in a class by itself for many reasons.
So what did you do when you were trying to figure out what to play and also how to put together this show about him?
Two very different processes. The first one, when I was doing the record, I got every book I could on Cole Porter, got all of the different books on his lyrics, and I would just read through the lyrics and basically, I like that one, that one is very sort of show specific, or maybe it was like a Yale fight song, or. Do
you have a favorite one that you wish you'd written? Because you're a songwriter too. Are there any that you just would have, given an arm to have come up with?
It's so, any one of them, because they're. I have 3 daughters, and I talk to my daughters. I'm sure they're tired of me talking about Cole Porter, but they love it. They love it. They're very smart young women, and I talk to my wife too, and I explain to them some of the idiosyncrasies of Cole Porter's writing, both musically and lyrically, and it's fascinating to them. They're 23 and 22 and 17, and that says so much, because it's like if you take Shakespeare and you try to explain it to somebody, you can be passionate about it, but the Shakespeare itself is not as accessible. Cole Porter's music is so, unless they use, like there's one song on the record that talks about you're the fair Miss Frigidaire. I mean, you have these odd, I tried to pick tunes that weren't using references that were not contemporary. The references aren't contemporary, but there's timeless references. And these pieces of music they're so brilliant, and if I know it's fascinating to my children, like I'm thinking, boy, what an amazing thing to have the honor of presenting that music to people who don't know who he is.
Right, well, I mean, they're also very contemporary because they're funny, they're very sexy. I mean, in a way that a lot of the old standards don't necessarily translate.
Oh, yeah.
These ones really hold up. What did you come to think about him as a person? I mean, he had such a fascinating life, like very glamorous, very tragic, palazzos in Venice with Diaghilev and the Ballet Russe, and hanging out with Scott Fitzgerald's friends, and
it's amazing.
But then, a terrible accident, being gay but being married to a woman, living in his world for a while. What did you come to think about this man who created this body of work?
It's just astounding and humbling. If all I thought about was his homosexuality and being gay at a time when you were not allowed to speak about that alone, not to imply that his heartbreak was informing his music, because it may have been and it may not have been. Some people like to think that the lyrics were directly related to his personal experience. I'm not so sure if that's true. That would be limiting his creativity if everything were autobiographical. But if that's the only thing that this man had to deal with, it's heartbreaking. And when you think about this marriage to this woman who eventually, clearly there was no sexual element to the marriage, but she ended up getting ready to leave him because of a lot of affairs that he was allegedly having, and then when he fell off this horse and lost the use of his legs and was in such pain, and resorted to alcohol and pills, and if that were the only thing he had to deal with, it's just so heartbreaking, because it's like finding out stories about somebody in your family. Like I had become so intimate with his music, and I look at pictures of him and I think he's so handsome and he's so elegant. And then you think, you know, behind those eyes, what was it like, you know? And then on the other side, I mean, this dude lived in Venice. He bought a barge in the middle of the water and like is having these big parties. And like the cops said, bro, you can't do that. Like you don't have a permit or anything. And like he was nuts. I mean, he was nuts. He was just he loved life and didn't care. I mean, some of those lyrics he wrote, they're just like, I mean, even today, people would say, wait a minute, what are you singing about?
Right. So in the show, you're singing his songs. You're not playing him the way Cary Grant played him in that highly fictionalized movie or Kevin Kline later. Right. How does it work?
So I was talking to my manager. Her name is Anne Marie Wilkins, and I've been with her since I was 18. So I'm 52 now, so we've been together a really long time. And we were talking about the record. This was Christmas Eve 2017. She said, you need to do something different for the people. I said, what do you mean? She goes, well, we've done a lot of concerts. Let's put your thinking cap on. And that night I had written a whole script, and the songs themselves were the storyline. And it basically uses the songs functionally out of the context of the shows for which they were written and lets that sort of drive the narrative. And there's, obviously it was edited, you know, over the next few months. But it's an experience that allows people to understand what these songs were about with added information that they don't necessarily need, but I think it provides different perspectives that they can gain something maybe that they wouldn't have before.
Some context, yeah.
Right.
So if we could pull back for a moment, I'd love to talk a little bit about how you got to be you. I mean, it's so interesting to me, you know, you grew up the son of a judge and a district attorney.
That was a barrel of laughs.
But you were in maybe the most musical city in the United States.
Right.
How did you become a pianist, and how did this all get started?
So in a nutshell, my mother was a Jewish woman from New York City. My dad, Irish Catholic from Mobile, Alabama. They met in North Africa. They got married in Morocco, moved back to New Orleans because my dad had been living in New Orleans. They went to law school and had a record store in the 1950s, and they put themselves through law school from the profits from that record store. By the time my sister came along, who's now, she just got promoted to colonel in the United States Army Reserve, which I'm very happy about. She and I both liked to play piano at a very, very young age, like, you know, 2 or 3. And I remember she would play a little bit and I would play, and I kind of plink out little melodies, and I had a cousin who would show me things, and my mother used to drag me around trying to get me lessons, but nobody would teach me at that age. Simultaneously, my parents knew that my sister and I both loved music. They loved music, so we go down to the French Quarter from the time I was probably 6, 7, and we hear these bands play. And they came to know me as a kid who would play like, Yes, Sir, That's My Baby, or When the Saints Go Marching In, and some of these songs. And they'd say, oh, Harry Jr., come up and play. So I started to play. And then when I got to be 14, I got a call to be the piano player on one of these gigs. And I knew my dad was going to say no, because my mother had died by that point. He was, you know, a single dad raising me and my sister. And I'm like, Dad, I got a call to go play on Bourbon Street. He said, well, that's very exciting. I said, yeah, but it's 11 o'clock at night till 3 in the morning. And he said, you can do it. He said, I'll drop you off and pick you up at I said, 3 in the morning? You're gonna? He said, yeah, I'll come do it. And,
amazing.
And so, you know, that was one of the many experiences that I had. But, you know, I grew up around a lot of incredible musicians, and I had 2 parents that were infinitely supportive.
And you had some great teachers in New Orleans.
Oh my gosh, like, I had I was doing classical music and jazz music at the same time. If you grew up in New Orleans and you study with Ellis Marsalis, there's a pretty good chance that you're gonna study classical music too, because his 2 oldest sons, Branford and Winton, were 6, 7 years ahead of me, and those guys set the bar like just so impossibly high. I mean, Winton was doing his classical repertoire at 19 and, you know, playing with Herbie, and Branford, you know, and then it's like, you know, we're the next group that come through was Donald Harrison and Terrence Blanchard and those guys. And then it was me and my group. And man, that was tough. I mean, Ellis was tough. He was a tough teacher. And that's where we learned everything.
Is it true that you played a Beethoven Concerto when you were 9?
I did.
With the symphony orchestra?
I did, yeah. I played a C minor. Only one movement of it
okay, that doesn't count.
And yeah, because I was heavily into classical music. I went to Tanglewood when I was 16 as a classical pianist. As a matter of fact, the teacher there, a man from Russia, heard me playing jazz. I swear to you, I'm not making this up. I promise you, I'm not exaggerating. He said, "Oh, I hear you sound like you play the devil's music," and I'm like, "What?" He said, "That stuff." I said, "Yeah, I play jazz music," and he wouldn't let me play. He kicked me out of the thing. Wouldn't let me play.
I thought we'd settled those arguments.
I know.
80 years ago.
Yeah, I know. So I ended up doing like something in the auditorium, like at 2 a.m, and made little flyers I wanted to play my stuff, but so I played a lot of classical music, played a lot of jazz music, played a lot of gospel music and funk music. These are the things that you do, traditional jazz music. When you grow up in a town like that, you hear all of that stuff.
And when you came to New York, it's interesting to me that you really made your first success as a pianist, right? How did you become a crooner and a singer? Like, how did that take off? It seems like it was very sudden almost.
Well, there was a guy named Dr. George Butler who was the A&R guy at Columbia Records. He signed Wynton and Branford years before. Wynton and Branford were talking about me to George, and they said, "There's this kid, he's coming up." So I met George when I was 14. I had won a competition called the National Association of Jazz Educators. It's now the International Association. And I was hounding him. I'm like, "Dr. Butler, I want to be on Columbia." He says, "Yeah, whatever." So when I moved to New York when I was 18, I went right to his office. I said, "Dr. Butler, it's me. I want to get," and I went there every day for about 6 months and sat in his lobby, and he would walk out. I'm like, "Hey, Dr. Butler," and he'd come back in after a meeting. Every day. And finally, one day he says, "Harry, come in. We'd like to offer you a contract." And let me just tell you, it's hard not to get emotional thinking about it. Like that red label on Columbia Records, I saw so many of my heroes on that. So I said, I have 2 questions. One, do you want me to sing on the record? He says, "No, because once you start singing, nobody's going to care about your piano playing." And the second thing he told me was, "You should lose the junior, because that's," and I said, "Well, I can't, because my dad's Harry Connick, and they cause a lot of confusion in my world." And he said, "Okay." So then I did a solo piano record, and then my next record I sang and played on, and then the next one was When Harry Met Sally, which went from like 0 to 100 literally in a couple of weeks.
It's like you're selling thousands of records and then you're selling millions of records.
It was literally that quick, and I was like 20 years old or something, 21.
That must have been hard to deal with almost. Was it surprising?
It wasn't hard. I welcomed it because my personality is such that I really wanted to embrace the idea of fame and success, but what was difficult was the byproduct of that. Some of my behavior was, I guess, par for the course for a young man who, needed to mature. But I loved it.
Right.
But looking back, I wish I could have done a few of those things over again.
I was actually looking through the clips of the Times, and I found a review that we gave you in 1988 when you were playing at the Blue Note.
Oh, wow.
And it said, the lead is, "Harry Connick Jr., a 20-year-old pianist and singer from New Orleans, is one of those blazing young musical talents that one hopes do not become stunted by too great an early success and too much lionization." So I thought that was pretty prescient in a way, because it was right before you blew up.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I just remember being very impatient with people. And I remember I was in Rockefeller Center one time, and this is obviously before digital cameras, and a woman and her husband came up to me, and I was having a bad day, I guess, and she starts clicking pictures of me, this close with a flash. And I said, "What are you doing? It's really bright." And she goes, "Well, oh, you're a big star. You can't take a picture." And so I was really, sometimes you're just really irritable. And I said, "Can I see that camera real quick?" And I took it and I opened it. And I said, here's your pictures. And she called a policeman over and stuff like that. And I look back and I said, you know, you learn from that stuff. You definitely learn from it.
Yeah,
and,
sure.
Yeah.
And it seemed like it was such an unusual time to be launching what became a sort of a swing and big band revival. I mean, it's like the age that grunge is happening. How did you navigate that, and how did that happen?
I didn't care. Yeah. I didn't care. When Harry Connick came out, all of a sudden I went from playing with a trio to a big band, and I didn't have any music to play. I had like 3 big band charts, so I started writing for this big band, and we went out on the road. I could care less about grunge. I mean, I thought it was cool, you know. I thought there was a lot of cool music out there, but when you grow up like I grew up, it's not a choice. It's almost like you're so immersed in music that it's like breathing, and I could care less what other people were doing, and it was just about playing this music. So yeah, by contrast, it was an interesting time. But
did you ever feel sort of straitjacketed by the success? I mean, because you have kind of a restless creative impulse, like you wanted to go back to Neville Brothers style funk and things and have different projects. Sometimes it hit, sometimes it didn't hit. Did you feel like people wanted to pigeonhole you, and was that difficult?
I only saw that like after I did a couple of records, these big band records, and they kept getting more and more successful. And I was like 23, and I said, man, I want to do a funk record, because I grew up playing funk music. Growing up with the Nevilles and the Meters, and you know, you hear that stuff, and I'm like, man, I want to do a whole album of that. And I had a relationship with the record company where they didn't care what I did. It wasn't like I submitted songs to them and they picked out the demos, and I didn't do any of that stuff. I told George Butler when I was 18, when I was doing my first record, I was in the middle of a take, and he presses the callback button and said, oh, Harry, I think you should do more of a crescendo on that passage. And I got up, I walked to him, I said, Dr. Butler, if you ever come and tell me how to play again, I'm gonna get out of my contract, because you hired me to do it. You know, it was a much different attitude than I had when I was waiting in his lobby, but I was really, I was very, very emphatic about what I wanted to do. So the record company was like, look, this is the artist that we're not gonna bother. We're gonna let him do his thing. So I gave him this record called She, and they said, what do you want us to do with this? You know, I said, I don't know. You know, I'll do whatever you want me to do to promote it. And I'll never forget, I'll be at like these 10,000 seat venues, and people are coming expecting it had to be you, and we just came out and just were playing this intense New Orleans funk music, and people by the hundreds would just get up and leave. Wow. And my manager, she said, you have to talk to the audience and educate them. And I said, I don't want to. You know, this is what I want to do, and I think to some degree I suffered, but on the other hand, I've never not done exactly. But I wasn't doing it as a result of feeling pigeonholed. I was doing it because I just love more than one thing.
Right. Yeah. The great soprano Jesse Norman, who just passed away, used to say, "Pigeonholes are for pigeons."
Yeah. It's true.
But now your acting career is very interesting to me, because it's sort of parallel and separate from your music career. I mean, you have done musicals on Broadway and stuff, but most of the movies and films that you've done are sort of straight ahead acting roles. Do you enjoy doing that? Do you wish that Hollywood made more musicals and there'd be a way for you to show both sides of you in them?
Well, I would love to do a musical, like a film musical. I've never done that. I think that'd be really cool. But we were briefly talking before the show about, and I think this goes for everybody in this room, you know, you're born with a mind, and you're born with a decision-making process, and no matter what you apply that to, your personality is going to manifest itself, whether you're working at a desk job and you decide you'd like to try gardening, and then whatever, it's still you. So the creative process of writing a song, playing a song, singing a song, orchestrating a song, tap dancing, acting in a dramatic film, it's all exactly the same, and that's why you are who you are, and that's something I've always been okay with all of my insecurities and less than phenomenal talents and whatever it is. I've always been okay with who I am, and when I go into a movie set, I look at the list of actors that I've worked with, you know, Renee Zellweger and, you know, Hilary Swank and, amazing people, and I just feel like I'm talking to you because I do what I do with the other stuff. I break it down and then I try to build something up and say, this is what I have to offer. And I don't really, I mean, if you like it, that's awesome. And if you don't, then that's who I am.
What was it like when success came, getting to perform for Frank Sinatra or meet Ella Fitzgerald or find these people who had kind of trod the path of the songbook before you? How was that?
I mean, they didn't trot it. They
Blazed it.
put landmines in it and blew it up. I mean, you're talking about, you just mentioned, arguably two of the greatest singers in the history of mankind.
Right.
And the time when I had to sing in front of Frank, I was like, I was dating Jill, who's now my wife. It was his 75th birthday party, so I don't know how old I was, 23 or something. And dig this, man. So I was singing that song More. You know that song? And so just to give you some context, the song was More. It was Frank Sinatra's birthday party. Every singer on the planet was in the audience, just like you are now. The chart was written by Quincy Jones. The conductor was some unknown guy by the name of Henry Mancini. And here's the lineup. Jack Jones came out and sang. And then Ella and Frank came out and sang a duet. And then me. Seriously. Like, come on. Like, I have to follow that.
Right.
And I go backstage, and I see Miss Fitzgerald sitting in a chair. She was 80. And she's going like this. She's just kind of sitting there, rocking back and forth, and all by herself. I said, Miss Fitzgerald, can I get you anything? You need some water or whatever? And she said, oh, no, I'm just terribly nervous because I have to go out and sing with Frank. And I'm like, and then my heart started beating, and I went out and I totally screwed it up and forgot the words. And I met Ella and Frank a couple of other times after that. And I mean, it's crazy, right? Like you think, like I touched those people. Like I shook Ella's hand. I sat next to her at her birthday party and played while she sang. It's Ella, and it was, I talked to Frank a few times. It's just heavy.
So now that you're doing your version of the songbook, you orchestrated all these songs as well. What was sort of the sound world you're trying to create? How do you go about orchestrating one of these sort of classic, well-known songs? How much do you want to intervene and kind of work against the song, and how much do you want to kind of work with the song?
So it's all about the material. Again, I mentioned before, you've sort of got the melody, and you got the lyrics, and you've got the harmonic structure underneath. And for me, it's about, what is the song about? Is it about, like in the Still of the Night, for example? I love the song, and I started thinking, the first thing you pick is the key, and because I know the singer, I know what key to put it in, and then you think about the tempo. I'm like, well, this should be sort of a medium tempo, and then I started thinking about the context of the song. It sounds like a beautiful love song. In the still of the night, as I gaze from my window at the moon in its flight, my thoughts all stray to you. Okay, wait a minute, that's saying something. I'm alone and I'm thinking about her. In the still of the night, all the world is in slumber. Oh, the times without number, darling, when I say to you, the bridge comes. Do you love me as I love you? Are you my life to be, my dream come true? There's a major problem for this guy now because he doesn't even know if it's reciprocated, and he's alone. And if you're gonna have an anxiety attack, what better place for it to happen than when it's super quiet and you're alone in your room and you're not distracted by the roaring traffic's boom, as it were. So when the shout chorus comes, the shout chorus, if you don't know, is the instrumental section really in a big band. It's loud and hard, and it has nothing to do with the still of the night. It has to do with my reaction to the still of the night. And so the arrangements write themselves. You have to, if you want to get super technical, you come up with a motif in the introduction it's like a melody under a melody that you develop thematically as the song goes on, just like the song itself. But like, what composer starts a thought at the bridge and continues it through the last section of the tune? Do you love me as I love you? Are you my life to be, my dream come true, or will this dream of mine fade out of sight like the moon growing dim on the rim of the hill in the chill still of the night? That's like, wait, what did you just, that's like the longest sentence ever. That's like one giant question. It's like, try singing that. Like, try singing that and holding the audience. I mean, he would do stuff like that all the time. And so that informs the arrangement. It gives you liberties to do things. Well, if he did it, I can do it. And so you start, having this fun. And he would do it with his melodies and with his chords the same way, like things you just didn't do. He would do all the time.
And listening to it, some of it I really was pleasantly surprised. Like I wanted to hear, what's he going to do with Begin the Beguine? Because I know the great Artie Shaw big band version, and I kind of skipped ahead on my Spotify. And then the whole first half of the song is like solo New Orleans piano. Like
That's right.
And it was such a great surprise kind of to see.
That's fun to do. There's a history among piano players that goes way back to like Jelly Roll Morton, when he would walk into a club and take off his jacket, and the lining was, as or more expensive than the outside, and he'd lay it down on the piano, and there was an arrogance in the best of ways, and a confidence about these piano players, and they would have these cutting contests. My purpose on Begin to Beguine was just to remind people, like, go ahead and try to play that. Yeah.
So we're going to open this up to questions in a moment, but I just wanted to ask you one last question, which is, now that you have one songbook under your belt, are we going to have more Harry Connick Jr. songbooks coming down the line for Rodgers and Hart or the Gershwins?
If I did one, it would probably be Rodgers and Hart or Harold Arlen. But I don't know. I don't know. There's so much. By the way, I was kidding about like that piano thing about you come and try to play it. Not really, but kind of joking about that. It's a New Orleans piano thing. We always try to put the hardest stuff out there. But no, maybe at some point I would like to do another one, but I haven't even thought about it.
Very good. Well, now I'm going to invite some questions from the audience, if you'd like. Contrary to what you might have heard, anything does not go. I mean, try to keep it, short and to the point, and please try to ask a question. And we have microphones set up on both aisles if you're interested.
Hello.
Hello. So Harry, when you talked about meeting all the players that you met, do you ever feel like they're a part of you now, or do you evolve and they go away?
That's a great question. I stopped listening to music like in my 20s because I knew if I kept listening to it, it would be ever present in my process. So when you hear my records, like if you don't hear Frank's influence or Monk's influence, or I could name 40 musicians who have influenced me, they're very much there. But at some point, I have to put the influences down. I'm 52 years old. Like, that was my 20s period. And so now you're I think invariably, the subtext of this music is the history of the music. That's sort of how art works, has always worked, but it's by no means a conscious thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But you do realize people are going to want to meet you and put you in them, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, that's an amazing. Everybody's got such a completely different perspective, and it's amazing to see how I and the music can affect anybody, but I approach it, like people like that, like I feel like I admire those folks so much, but like I just got to do, there's no roadmap for what I'm trying to do because I haven't seen this particular version done before. So although I have a ton of influences, I feel like I'm maybe trying something a little bit new.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you for coming back to Broadway first.
Yes, ma'am. Thanks.
Is there possibly a role, a musical, or a movie role that you kind of would think about doing in the future?
Like a musical role?
Well, like a great show in the past was Kismet, and like now there's a lot of revivals. Is there anything that you might want to do or think of?
I mean, there's a ton of stuff. Like the last musical I did was On a Clear Day, which I had never in a million years thought about, and I had a blast doing it. So it's one of those things where if I were to do something that I wanted to do, I would write it. I would write something new. But if somebody came up to me and said, "Hey, we want to redo," in this case, High Society, I'd be like, well, let's read the script and see, who's directing it and all of that. Because that stuff, that music is not. We're not done with that yet. That stuff is so. it's like Shakespeare or Beethoven. I mean, just because it happened a few years ago doesn't mean that we've exhausted the potential of its capacity and all that. So
I like that you named this album True Love because, I mean, High Society is such an interesting project, right? Because in some ways it should be the greatest movie of all time. It's
Right.
based on the Philadelphia Story. It's got Frank Sinatra and Bing Crosby and Grace Kelly and Louis Armstrong. It's got this book and music by Cole Porter. And yet whenever I watch it, it's a little like, it doesn't quite gel for me, even though I always watch it every time it's on.
Right.
But it was nice to hear, like, you know, you take True Love and get it out of Bing's squeeze box and you know,
Right.
make it swing a little bit. It was interesting.
It's yeah. I mean, you can do so much with this music. It's just incredible. And True Love. I mean, that song, it sounds like one of those Schumann. What do they call them? Kinder. The piano.
Reader,
yeah.
yeah.
And yeah. And the lyrics. You know, I give to you, you give to me. True love, true love. So on and on, it will always be true love, true love. Like I tell my dad sometimes, like, Pop, if I came to you and I said, hey, look, I have this lyric, man. I've been working really hard on this. Check this out. It's about Paris. I love Paris in the springtime. I love Paris in the fall. Like you think like, how come Cole Porter can write that and I can't write that? You know what I mean? So yeah, so True Love is one of those songs that's deceptively simple. That's another one that starts with a bridge and continues. For you and I, you think the bridge is for you and I have a guardian angel on high with nothing to do, period. But that's not it. For you and I have a guardian angel on high with nothing to do but to give to you and to give to me love forever true. Yeah. So he like, what are you doing, man?
Yeah.
Like he did that's it's crazy. He did all kinds of stuff. Hello.
Hello. Hi, Carrie. Two things. First is a story. So we saw you at Tanglewood a few years ago, and it was a great performance.
Thank you.
And during the performance, there was a major thunderstorm,
I remember that.
rainstorm, and it was really bad. And you said, hey, all you folks on the lawn, come on in. And it was Panicsville. Everyone on the lawn came in, and you had to chase them back out.
It was panic with the people with the good seats. Like, oh my goodness, they're invading our first-class territory.
It was the funniest event. It was really cool.
Thank you.
Second thing, Joe Turner ever influence your music?
Say it again.
Joe Turner.
Yeah.
Ever influence your music?
You mean Big Joe Turner?
Joe Turner.
Joe Turner
Blues,
from
rock.
I'm thinking
Joe
of the
Turner.
Joe Turner from Count Basie's band.
No, way before that.
No, I guess not.
Cool. Just a
I guess
question.
not. Who was Mr. 5x5? The guy they called Mr. 5x5. That wasn't Joe Turner, was it? I'm gonna go listen to some Joe Turner
Tonight, yeah.
My next deep dive will be the Joe Turner songbook. Yeah. Yes. Hi.
Hi, thank you for coming, and thank you for inviting us lawn ticket people to sit inside. I was one of them. Thank
Were
you
you
very
there
much.
that night too?
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Reunion.
Wow.
Fortuitous timing there with the question. Speaking about different interests, and you say that you like to perform and compose different styles of music. To switch gears a little bit, I love your Christmas albums and your
Thanks.
Christmas
Thank
music,
you.
your contributions to the Christmas music canon, if you will.
Thank you.
Can I just ask you, how do you like to spend Christmas with your family? What are
How do I write tunes?
No, how do you like to spend Christmas?
Oh, how do I like to spend
with
Christmas?
your family?
Oh yeah, it's just my wife and my girls, and if like maybe my dad's in town or her dad's in town or both of them are in town. It's like super traditional. Like we usually stay kind of in the New York area and just kind of hang out. But it's like we just, you know, like one of my daughters wanted everybody to wear matching footy pajamas last year, so we all wore these red footy pajamas. It's like we just have a good time. Yeah,
very good.
for
Thank
sure.
you.
Now get back to your seat in the back. Thank you.
Hey, I'd like to ask you about a record, not one of yours, but one I'm sure you probably like, Charlie Parker with Strings.
Yeah.
And as you probably recall, when he brought that out, people criticized the record company and him for going commercial, and yet it was probably his favorite record, and it was really important for him to perform it live, and every alto player who's been born since wishes they could perform with strings. So I'd just like your take on that record, because I'm sure you know it.
Oh yeah, I mean it's it's unbelievable. And I love anything with strings. I'm just a sucker for strings anyway, which is why I write so much for them. But yes, I think it's an important record, and to hear, jazz musicians playing out of their normal context is fascinating. I remember hearing some of, when I was a teen and I heard Wynton's records or Ellis's records playing with strings. I love that sound. I just love it. And I love when things that aren't typically jazz, or I think it was Klaus Ogerman who did that arrangements for Frank with Jobim album. And I mean, I love that stuff. Writing for strings is so fun. So yes, that's one of the great, jazz string records.
Once I Loved from that Jobim album is really great.
Say it again?
Once I Loved is really great from that Jobim album you're talking about.
Oh yeah, no, that's some of the greatest stuff of all time.
But I'll leave you alone. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Speaking of strings, when you're orchestrating, do you have an era in mind when you're trying to create a sound picture? Are you thinking, I want this to, evoke like an Ellington feel or a Basie or a...
No, I want it to evoke 2019. I want it to evoke right now, because the instrumentation is, I had to make this very clear when I was doing various stages of the record, like, maybe shooting a video, and, people want to have vintage mics, and I was born in 1967. Right. I live right now. So just because I use a bass player and a drummer and people who actually play instruments doesn't mean that, I'm crying out for another era. So no, I would never do that.
That's period music.
No, yeah, it is. And I mean, nobody's going to write, that music better than Duke, So I'm just writing what I think is appropriate, and I guess only time will tell if it at some point, sounds like something that came from 2019.
Another question.
Hello.
I just wanted to stare at you. No, just seriously, when was it?
See, what he doesn't understand is I'm from New Orleans. I'll outstare him. Yeah.
When was the last time you played at the Shell in Honolulu, Hawaii?
Wow, we were just in Kona, Hawaii I was there with my children, and I think I've only played there once.
And I saw you at that concert, and I was sold.
Oh, thanks. I was just thinking about that.
No, really, that was 20 some odd years ago.
I know, and when my daughters had never been in Hawaii, and I said, I played here, and we were talking about that, and I forgot that was the name of the place, but...
Yeah. It was Outdoor Amphitheater.
Yeah, that's right. I
you
remember.
Killed it then.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Thank you so much. Hi.
So obviously you're in New Orleans, you love that place. That's where I think your blood is flowing from. What would make you then move to New York if New Orleans has all this music and where it feeds you?
Because I had played every gig there was to play in New Orleans. I had done every possible...
But you could stay there, but then travel.
Right. Well, if you want to be in the music business, for me, I had to be in New York, because that's where Columbia Records was. That's where the venues were. That was the place that you can fly in and out of internationally easier without getting on another 3.5-hour flight, after you land in New York, stuff like that. But I'm home like 12 times a year. I mean, I'm there all the time, and I go stay with my dad. So maybe one day I'll move back, but I'm so comfortable in the Northeast.
Yeah,
but
you have a affiliation with the Saints, right?
I'm just a fan. I love them so much, and I have.
Owner?
Say what?
Part owner? Are you?
Oh no, nothing like that. I'm just a fan. I mean, I own a lot of swag, but that's. But I buy it on Amazon and stuff.
Yeah. Versus the New York stuff, you're not wearing that.
Good. Thank you. Hey.
Actually, hi. Perfect follow-up to that. What influence does New Orleans have on you today in your music? And did Dr. John influence you at all?
So I grew up spending a lot of time with a guy named James Booker, who was Dr. John's sort of contemporary. And I love Dr. John. He was a good friend, known him for a long, long time. Was so sorry when he died. But Dr. John was not really an influence on me. derived infinite entertainment out of his music, and I loved it. And when we would play together or I'd listen to him play, he was just so awesome at what he did. But James was sort of my guy. James was like something otherworldly to me. And again, it's not to disparage Mac, because he was so great. But to answer the first part of the question, I'm not sure how the New Orleans thing influences me anymore, but I know I'm heavily influenced by New Orleans. Just because, like, I'm not thinking, well, let me go into my New Orleans piano thing. It's just all kind of, stream of consciousness, but it's had a profound effect. I mean, when you spend that much time studying and playing and recording, it's very much a part. I mean, if you said play some New Orleans piano, I'd know what you mean, but I think it infiltrates everything that I do, even if it doesn't sound like it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now we have time for, I think, one last question.
If we stop asking questions, will you play?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
And I think you've kind of done my work for me there, because now Harry Connick has generously agreed to give us a few tunes. We want to say farewell to our streaming viewers, and to the audience here. Enjoy the show.
Thank you. Thanks, Michael. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.